let me let you guys in on a secret. You know why I started podcasting? Because our mutual friend, Brian Kramer, tried to get me to start podcasting 15 years ago. Yeah,
Oh, really?
easily. Yeah. And, but I didn't podcast because I didn't use it. I didn't, but I am a fan of podcasting. And I'll tell you a podcast that I'm a very big fan of. It's called Classic Conversations with Jeff Dwoskin. I'm not even lying. You think I'm lying. I'm not lying.
I know that one.
This is the host, Jeff Dwoskin. How are you? And thank you for being on. I've been excited about this for the last couple of weeks.
I am excited that you're so excited. So
no, and it's like, you know, Brian, who's a friend of ours, and Brian works with me on this podcast. He goes, you should see his podcast room. It's amazing. And I'm like, so it's not my little room? He goes, no, every wall is filled with people he's been with and seen and took pictures with and had on the show. And I'm like,
oh, you talked to him recently. It was just in my house. Yeah.
Yeah. He and I had a thing this morning. And then when I get done with this, we're going over to have a cigar at a cigar shop.
Nice.
So he goes, I can't wait to hear how the podcast goes. And I'm like, oh, I can't wait either because I'm a big fan. And he goes, well, I wish I'd have known. I'd have told him. I'm like, what are you going to do? First of all, how in the world did you come up with this idea? And explain Classic Conversations.
Explain. It's a pop culture nostalgia deep dive with my guests. So it originally kind of started with me wanting just to talk to the people that I grew up with, you know, I mean, watching on TV, you know, so like Isaac, Gopher, Doc from the Love Boat, you know, I have a weird fascination with the Love Boat. And it's not that I haven't had the other people on, they haven't said yes. So, you know, if you're listening, and, you know, I had like, you know, Penny from Lost in Space, you know, Angela Cartwright and, you know, all that kind of stuff. And so, you know, as I reached out to people that I had an interest in talking to, and I like talking to people that I have a personal direct interest in, it just started kind of steamrolling. And as like the coolest moment, I think, in my podcast, which came early, is Bruce Valanche was one of my first celebrity. He's a famous writer.
Bruce
He's written
Valanche,
for the Oscars.
legendary writer for the Oscars.
Legendary. And so he was on my podcast, and then I invited someone else on my podcast who was an author that I really liked. And I'm like, hey, you know, I'm really interested. I want to talk to people that have made a difference in my life. You wrote a book that, you know, I've destroyed. I've read so many times. And she's like, well, if it's good enough for Bruce Valanche. So I'm like, oh, I get it now. This is cool. So it kind of builds on itself. So, you know, after now, you know, I'm about to hit 250 episodes, and, you know, I'd have someone go, oh, I had a guest go, I was honored. You know, when I saw who has been on your show, I was honored that you called me. I'm like, okay. I still can't get used to, like, when I'm talking to, like, you know, Potsy, you know, like, and Anson Williams, and he's thanking me profusely for being on my show. I'm like thinking to myself, I'm just, thank you.
I think it's brilliant. And you and I both know the hardest thing about podcasting is to get guests and get interesting guests, right? I think out of the first 10 podcasts I did, I think I had a personal relationship. They were friends of mine. They were friends of mine who did interesting things, but they were friends, you know? And they had, and trying to branch out and get those bigger names. And in my business, I've got a background in country music. So in my business, I was able to reach out to some of the singers and songwriters I know, which helps. And you're right, it builds. You know, once you can sit back and go, hey man, I've had Charles Kelly. I've had, you know, think of anybody. I mean, I've had bigger names, you know, and then once you get them on, it helps to get the next. And I thought it was such a brilliant thing, because if you go through the 250 list of people that you have on, if you're over 30 years of age, and I do use 30 as a demarcation, but if you're over 30 years of age, there is no way you're not going to recognize someone on your guest list. And I think it's impressive as hell. And you're just cold them, huh?
I reach out. It's a combination. I got to say, like, so it's reaching out to like publicists and stuff like that and asking.
Mhm.
And then also I have, then it became like kind of fun for my friends who are kind of ancillary to the business to get people onto my show. Like they'd be like, I have this one guy, Paul Lander, shout out to him. He's really cool. He's always saying, hey, Jeff, I got this person for your show. They already said yes, just email. And so he's like acts as sort of my go-between. And what's cool about that is there are people that I never would have asked because I didn't necessarily know who they were, or I didn't know them, or I wouldn't think to ask. And I've gotten to know some really cool people. When I prepare for a show, which is why sometimes, I want to be interested in the people, I spend a long time preparing for the interviews that I do. And
I was going to bring that up, that you do them the respect of really knowing their stuff. And it shows. And what it does is it frees you up. Because now you're talking to somebody and you don't have to like sit back with your notes and go, oh, I need to ask this question. You know them.
Right. And they appreciate it. And like, so they'll be like, oh yeah, I was with this person. And I go, Bill, or they'll say, I did this one show in the 80s with this guy. And I'll just, oh, you mean, Booze and Buddies or whatever, you know what I mean? And so what I found was, and like, I've spoken on this, I give his tips, is like the research, when they know that you know them, then they'll start telling you more stuff and they'll open up to you and you'll get a better interview because they start to trust you because they realize, oh, he put in the time. And I've talked to people, my biggest wins are when I talk to some folks, and I talked to folks that were popular in the 70s, right? So some of them have been doing interviews on pop culture stuff for decades. And so I come around, I interview them and they'll say, wow, you're asking questions I've never even been asked before. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
I had some other podcasters on and they're like, Jeff, we just did 40 this week and no one asked us these questions. So it's like, I don't know. I'm not doing it. I don't think I'm doing anything different, but,
Well,
yeah.
you are, as somebody who does something, I've been in broadcasting for 40 years. I've been doing interviews a long time. And I enjoy you because I know you're a stand-up comedian. And I love how quick you are. It's a very dry humor, but I think your brilliance is that you're funny without ever trying to be funnier than, right? So you allow them to be funny and then you give them support, which is what I always had a good rapport with comedians. And I've had everybody in studio. I've had, you name it, Tracy Morgan, Kevin Nealon, anybody you can think of, there's a good chance I've had them in studio. And I would just laugh and enjoy what they were doing. And I never tried to compete with them. And morning radio was infamous for always trying to never act like anything was funny or you tried to get a line better than them. And I always took the attitude, if you're funny, I get credit for it. People will go, did you hear Gary this morning? He was so amazing. Really, what happened? Oh, Tracy Morgan was there and he said.
Exactly. You're funny by association.
By association. And you are brilliant. You know what I love? I love that I try to do research too, right? That I try to do research too. And when I have a really good podcast, I may have a page full of notes with ideas. And I know it's a really good podcast when I never use anything on my page. Because now we're having a conversation.
Right,
now we're
right.
just talking. And that's where true fun is happening. And that's where you can tell some of these, because I listened to a number of yours and I'm having fun going back and finding the back episodes and go, oh, I can't wait. Oh. And I've got Dave Thomas lined up to go next. And Dave Thomas, for anybody of a certain age, and you kind of need to be over 50 to really know who Dave Thomas is. SCTV, Canadians, the whole thing. I can't wait to hear him because what you end up doing is you end up having who was a favorite show of mine, a favorite you did that was a real, true conversation.
Which one?
Are you ready?
Yep.
Ruta Lee.
Love talking to Ruta Lee.
Because you talked to her. There was no, the only thing you ever brought up on your own was the Twilight Zone episode. And then she took it over from there and gave you just great stuff because it sounded, now you could tell she's answered questions about that, but she's never had a conversation about.
Right. Well, because, I also take the time, I rewatch the episode, right? So sometimes it puts me even at advantage of them because they may have not have seen it for 30 years. And then I'll dive into trivia just on that episode, that kind of thing. I remember I love talking to Ruta Lee. She was amazing. And the funny part about that Twilight Zone episode is when I rewatched it and I started saying, she was like, Jeff, don't go all woke on me. Because I was like, I'm not going woke. It's just, they blame the woman in the episode, but it's really the brother. It was one of those things. Anyway, go watch the episode. It was interesting that it was also one of those Twilight Zone episodes that had disappeared for years because of legal issues and then had then been kind of refound at some point. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree with her. I don't think you rewrite history. You realize that things were a product of their time and then you go from there, and because things change. Trust me. Yeah, you used to go, well, 20 years from now, will they still think the way we think now? Hell, it's now. Well, I hope in December that they still think the way we do now. And if you try to play that game, it ends.
No, I'm smart enough not to go into that conversation. I literally thought in rewatching this episode, it was wrongly slanted even at the time. Not even in right. We don't have to get into that. It was just one of those things.
No, I get what you're saying, and I'm not trying to put you in anything.
No, I get it. But it was just funny. But it was cool because she was raw with me. It was a good conversation, and so that was fun. She was a lot of fun to talk to.
That's what I loved about her. And, she wrote a book going, Consider Your Ass Kissed, which I thought is maybe the one most brilliant book title ever. Right. And it flowed. You had so many good conversations. I enjoyed Kathy Garrett. Is that her name? From Sissy from A Family Affair.
Oh,
right.
Yeah. Oh yeah. She's awesome. Yeah, she was really cool. I love talking to her. And it's fun too when you kind of just stumble on certain things. We were talking and it was interesting because she was in the 10 Commandments. She was just a young kid in the 10 Commandments. But there was an episode that I watched. So what I do when I prepare, just some secrets for people. So especially if they're on sitcoms and stuff, I try to find out what their favorite episodes are because they've usually said it somewhere. And I'll go watch the episodes because I figure if those are the ones that are kind of top of mind to them. So there was a couple that I watched and she had actually drawn the family in one of them. And I just assumed, actually I had the question written down and I was like, who drew those? And I was like, whatever. But then she just mentions, oh, I drew those. I'm like, you're that good. And we had just been talking about like her selling stuff on her website. And I'm like, why aren't you selling those? I mean, I was like, she was really good, very talented artist. And so, but yeah, she was fun. I love talking to people. Like that was like one that my wife was so excited. Sissy from Family Affair. I'm like, yeah. The Kathy Garver, and then it's interesting people like that too, because she was in Spider-Man. She was in the cartoon Spider-Man. She was Firestorm. So when she goes to Comic-Cons, there's a whole different Marvel group that would love to meet her as well. So it's interesting when people can kind of completely cross genres.
Well, she's Chuck from Happy Days. Does that make sense? Because Chuck was the older brother who disappeared after one season, and the stories were never written around him. Once they realized that you had Richie and his sister, Joni, Chuck was never seen again. And I always felt for Kathy because she was the older sister, but only anybody ever cared about were the two kids, Johnny Whitaker and Anissa Jones. Is that how you say her name? And I always felt bad for her because, and you had these really three talented actors. I mean, Sebastian Cabot, Brian Keith, and Kathy Garver. She was a very talented actress, but aren't these kids cute?
Well, anytime a show kind of goes like that, but all I remember is having a crush on Sissy. That's all I remembered.
Well, like I said, she was very pretty. But when you saw her, I mean, you only saw her in reruns. You didn't see it live.
Correct.
Yeah. See, so
Oh, yeah.
that's the difference. And a lot of these things, you're coming at it from a fan who's found them and seen it. And I love the fact that when you find out they have favorite episodes, isn't it always interesting when you find out why? It may hinge on just the smallest thing.
Right. Sometimes it's just one little speech from it or something they got to do in it, or it's a variety. And usually they have a small handful, but it's an interesting insight into them and how they feel about the show that they were on.
Who would you list right now? Because again, you have to go 250 episodes, which is crazy because I can tell you guys, I've known this as I've done this podcasting stuff. You know how many episodes most podcasts last? 7. Because after 7, people go, wait, I have to do it again?
It's so much
I have
work.
to do it again? Hold again? And that's the hard part. And you've got 250, and that is jaw dropping. It really is. And in addition to all the other stuff you do, because you're a stand-up and you're a business owner and you've got all these things you do, is this the passion project? And I'll get back to my original question in a second. But what really got you in this and what sustained you?
Well, I have a tendency. I don't quit things. So it's like, it's hard for me to break away because you never know if you're like 2 inches from the gold. Right. And so originally when I started, I mean, it took me a while to start this podcast. I mean, like originally it was like, I didn't literally launch till 2020, but I had kind of bought all the equipment in 2017. Funny quick story is originally, it was going to be a social media based podcast. It was going to be called Viral Intentions. And, like Cruel Intentions, the movie, but Viral Intentions. I was really big on Twitter and I would, go viral all the time on Twitter. And my tweets were always in magazines and publications on the news. It's like they would just randomly show up everywhere. And so I was going to do a whole thing on that. And I think I just never was fully passionate about it. And so when the pandemic hit, so that was 2017, everything ends up in a box. The pandemic hits. I'm like, oh, we all have time again. We all have time. And so I pull everything out of the box. I mean, I had everything, Gary. I had the intro. I had the outro. I had the art. I had everything ready to go. I just never did anything. So I'm like, I have time. And I was like, and I go, and I realized, oh my God, it's March 2020. I cannot start a podcast called Viral Intentions, right? And it's like, and I'm just like, oh crap! It was I had everything. So I was like, all right. So I changed it to the Jeff Dwoskin Show, and eventually became Live from Detroit, the Jeff Dwoskin Show. And then finally, I rebranded it just to make it Classic Conversations, just to kind of make it clearer. It took me time. It takes time when you do a podcast. You don't really know who you are and what you're doing at first. And so eventually I realized, okay, this is what the podcast is and it needs a name that makes sense. And so that was sort of the evolution of it. And, so it takes time. Everyone, pushes things off, but that was sort of my journey. Getting into like talking to celebrities was a little bit of an accident, but then once I realized, oh, they'll talk to me, then it was just all in. So.
Well, I'm inspired by that because I reached out to one of my favorite authors too and thinking, what have I got to lose? And I just literally went to his website and was hoping to hear from his people, because they all have people.
Right.
And sent him a note going, hey, I'd love to have you on my podcast and hope to hear back, as well as I do. You send off a thing, and
Right.
if you get something back within 6 weeks, that's a win. That's a complete win. And I sent it out, and I'm having lunch, and all of a sudden, when do you want to do this? Like an hour later. And I'm like, really? For sure? It's like, yeah. And it's, so that's what I've learned. And that's a thing that I think both you and I can tell people. You got to have the courage to do it, but you also need to build up. You've got to build it up. Most of the platforms don't even want to look at you until you have 20 episodes recorded. Because as we said, the average is 7. And they're like, okay, well, we'll wait till we know you're serious about it. And when you're serious, we'll see what you have to go from there.
Exactly. It never, it's one of those things where it's like, you get more no's. So I don't want to make it seem easy. If I've done hundreds of interviews, I've had hundreds upon hundreds of people ignore me or say no as well. You know what I mean? And so, but it's just a matter of you just got to keep asking. And what I found is you can go back and ask again just because someone said no at one point. The timing might have been wrong. So it's always worth it to kind of go back to that well. I remember you said like, sometimes you don't hear. And so I'm sitting around, I reached out to Robert Klein, the comedian.
Robert Klein.
And so I never heard. And I was like, at some point I just said, okay, I guess he's not, it's just not going to happen. And all of a sudden I'm in the kitchen with my wife and my phone rings and the caller ID says Robert Klein. And I almost went, right? I'm like, oh my God. So I'm like, hello? Hey, Dwoskin. Yeah. He always called me Dwoskin, which I like. And he's like, I hear you want me to do your podcast. I'm like, all right. And so we arranged a time and I'm talking, and like, Gary, I don't know about you, but like, and it's just my insecurities, but I don't know how to talk to a celebrity when he just calls me. You know what I mean? I'm sure it's just like a normal person, but you know what I mean?
Hello?
Yeah, exactly. It's happened twice. Bernie Kopell did that too. Doc from the Love. All of a sudden my phone rings. It says Bernie Kopell. I'm like, hey, Jeff, you want to, let's do this tomorrow. I'm like, okay. I'm like, I'm like, and so I was like, I took a screenshot. I have a screenshot on my phone. It says Robert Klein. I was like, but it was, it's fun. It doesn't happen very often, but there's been some cool people like Al Jean. Getting him on my show was interesting.
Al Jean from The Simpsons.
Right. So he's been the executive director, showrunner of The Simpsons for over 3 decades now. I'm from Farmington Hills. He grew up in Farmington Hills, Michigan, same city as me. And his parents owned Jean's Hardware. So I always grew up, which was a little local hardware store that my dad would go to, and he would take me there. So it was always a Jean's Hardware. And when I would watch The Simpsons, I'd be like, Al Jean, Jean's Hardware, like forever, because that was my mental connection to it. So when I reached out to him, I said, hey, we both are from Farmington Hills, Michigan. And I've spent this is me writing as publicist, actually. I've spent countless weekends at Jean's Hardware, Al's family's hardware store over the weekends, growing up. And I get a personal email from Al Jean saying any former customer of Jean's Hardware, I'd be happy to be on his podcast. And then boom, that was that.
Good. I'm going to reach out and go, I know somebody.
I know someone who used to go to Jean's Hardware.
I've never been to Michigan, but I've known people who live there, and they speak highly of your hardware store.
I hear your family knows a lot about hammers. Yeah.
Yeah, in the Great Lakes region. You got the best. All right. Well, as always with all podcasts, the reason we can continue to do this is because somebody sponsors us. So I'm going to take a quick sponsor break and come back more with Jeff Dwoskin. And I got so much stuff. I got so much questions. And here's a good thing. I'm not using any of my notes. So it's turning into a good conversation. We're coming back right after this on Here's What We Know.
It's time to think differently when it comes to your parties, meetings, and groups. The catering from Havana Cuba restaurant in downtown San Jose. Instead of the same old, how about the most delicious Cuban sandwich you've ever had? You're tired of fries? Plantains, my friends, they'll change your world. And here's something you didn't know. Havana Cuba was voted one of the top 10 tamales in the entire South Bay. They have vegan, vegetarian, and gluten-free options, and their website is 998cuba.com. They're located at 387 South 1st Street in downtown San Jose. It's Havana Cuba. Mike Council Plumbing is simply the best plumbing company you can get. I know, because I trusted my 60-year-old home to them. We wanted the best, and they stand behind their work and offer a 100% satisfaction guarantee in writing. They have an on-site training center. Their technicians never stop learning. They train 5 days a week to make sure you only get competent and reliable service. California real estate is too valuable to trust anyone else. Go to mcplumbing.com and enter the promo code Gary to get $100 off any plumbing service. Mike Council Plumbing. I trust them, and you can too.
So I have to ask this because you have 250 episodes. If I had to go, give me the top 5 that stand out in your mind, not your favorites, because that's telling people that I like this better than I like that, but the ones that stand out in your mind. And you can do it like they do. You can even put it back where here is where I think I was at my best. Whatever. But if the top 5 off the top of your head, what would you pick?
Oh, top 5.
Because I'm going to put them in order,
that's
and then I'm going to go listen to them.
That's a hard one. So it's like it's fun. It's, you know how it is. It's the memory of the conversation and then listening to your own voice when you're editing and stuff. It's like, it doesn't necessarily feel the same, but that is not how other people hear it. And I found that, and you probably have this too, because you talk to a lot of famous people as well, is when people go, oh, who is the most famous person on your show? Which I know isn't exactly the question you asked, but I had to finally realize that the answer is, that's really up to you who the most famous person, because I
Good
always
answer.
I always realized this would be what would happen. And this is no disrespect to the person I'm about to name. I would go, I don't know, Ed Begley Jr., Ed Asner, Sharon Gless, Carl Gottlieb, the guy who wrote Jaws. And then I get glossy-eyed looks, and I go, Carol Baskin from Tiger King. Oh my God, you talked to Carol Baskin? I'm like, yes, I talked to. Oh my God, guys, he talked to Carol Baskin. Now, I find Carol Baskin fascinating, and so I'll put that in my top 5. I loved my conversation with Carol Baskin. She's fascinating. She does amazing things, and that show, Tiger King, made her look like this criminal that killed her husband. They really should have made her look like a hero because of all the great things she does for the big cat community. But it's just funny that, you go Ed Asner and these people with these careers, but it's just the one person on that, that reality show on Netflix that, that everyone happened to watch because it was during the pandemic.
I respect that, because it is when you get those things, because people will do that. And if you sit back and go, well, who? And that's why I asked some of your favorite conversations. Some of my favorite conversations can happen when you go weird. I was talking to this country singer. Matter of fact, his episode was just out recently. And what happened is we're talking, and all of a sudden we hit something, and I found out he was in the band, the marching band. And I was in the marching band. And we spent 15 minutes nerding out on marching band. And it was so much fun, because anybody listening to it would never have tuned in to hear we two people talking about what we ended up talking about. Right?
Right.
And like the author, Jonathan Mayberry, does the Joe Ledger series, but he's also big in the world of comic books. And he started talking to me about how he came up with this idea, and it's what they filmed for the last big Ant-Man Quantum. He came up with that idea, and he was explaining to me, and he came up with it 30 years ago. Right. So this was stuff that's in his past, and just getting to be able to go on that parts of conversations. I think that's what it is when you end up at things, and they end up telling stories that that they didn't expect to tell. You know, that's what I loved about Rita Rubner. When you talk to her, you know, very famous comedian from the 70s and 80s, and talked about, I had never heard of industrial shows. And she talks about industrial shows and how they made money. And this was a big thing that your actors, this is how they survive, and dancers, how they survive. Were these, again, I don't know if you went into it knowing about them.
Oh,
I mean,
I did.
Was that
And
something, or is
so
that just,
the interesting thing about that, so if they have a book, I legit read the book, right? And so she had her memoir
I do
out,
too.
and she talked about industrial shows. It was one sentence in that book. I think I even mentioned, I go, you talk about this for one sentence. But if you want to put one on the top 5 lists, there's an interview I did with someone named Steve Young. You're like, I don't know who that is. Well, he worked for David Letterman for decades. And he was in charge of a thing at David Letterman where they did like funny records. And so when he was doing his research on these funny records, he came across these things called industrial shows. Real quick, an industrial show is basically in the 70s, 60s, 70s, let's just say GM, General Motors, would have a sales meeting, and they would spend millions of dollars to pay people who would later go on to write Fiddler on the Roof and other things, literal plays, musicals about their products, right? So you had songs about whatever General Motors, the newest motor is efficiency free, whatever. And so they would make tons of money, the actors, and like Rita Rivera, Rita Rudner, you mentioned, but like Cheetah Rivera, it was so many famous people did these industrial shows, but they were never meant to be seen. But Steve Young discovered them on vinyl, because what they would do is the marketing departments made them on vinyl records, and when you leave a company meeting, they hand you something. So they would hand these people these vinyl records. So he discovers this entire world and created, and then made this documentary on Netflix. I think it's Netflix or Amazon Prime, called Bathtubs Over Broadway, which I recommend anyone listening. It's the best 90 minutes you'll ever spend. It is amazing. And if you watch the last season of The Marvelous Miss Maisel, she actually performs in, and I believe was inspired by this, just people knowing about it that way, but she's performing in an industrial musical in season 5. When she's dressed up as a trash person in New York, that's what that is. And so it was just fascinating. So when Rita Rudner was like, in her book, is like, and I did industrial musicals. And then she went on to something else. And so I said, I guarantee, unless someone else listened to my conversation, no one else picked up on that in her book. and so, but I did. And then she started singing me one of the songs because she just remembered it. And, so sometimes it's those unique things. Like I was talking to this guy, Joel Thurm. He was a casting director of Grease and Taxi and Airplane. And so, but in his book, he's talking about doing theater and meeting Georgiana, I can't remember his last name, from like the Mary Tyler Moore Show and stuff, in Southfield, Michigan. I mean, that's where I'm from. I'm from Farmington Hills, but Southfield, Michigan.
Georgina Engel is
Georgina Engel. Thank you. And, so I was like, I went into that, I mean, because if I can find something that relates to me or something like that, I think it'll get, goes down a different path. I'll listen to people if I'm going to interview them on other podcasts, because I want to see if they're a talker or not. I need to prepare if they're a long answerer or a short answerer. Ed Asner, for example, was a short answerer.
Well, you talk to these 90-year-olds. Come on, what do you expect?
But even if you look at his book, his memoir was like 150 pages. Mary Tyler Moore, that section should have been 150 pages.
I mean? I hate spunk.
But I think that my conversation with Ted Neely is right up there. I love Dee Wallace. Stuart Pankin was one of my favorites. Anthony not anything. I'm blanking on his name. Potsy, Anson Williams. I
Anson
love that
Williams.
conversation because sometimes when I talk to people, some of the things they've done since are even cooler. Like Anson Williams, his uncle was Heimlich maneuver. And so one of the things when I was researching, I realized that we all know about the Heimlich maneuver likely because of Anson Williams, because when he was on the Merv Griffin show, he helped get Heimlich on the Merv Griffin show and get national attention to the Heimlich maneuver. So if you ever know anyone who's ever been saved by that, it's likely you could tie it back to that moment and thank Anson Williams. And so Anson Williams, I think he fell asleep driving, and like falling asleep while you're driving is like a real problem. And so he realized though when talking to Heimlich, his uncle, that lemons really shoot you awake. And so Dr. Heimlich told him, bite on lemons if you're driving, and it'll wake you up. And then Anson Williams developed a spray where you can spray it while you're driving, and it gives you that same shock to the nerve system that will wake you up if you're kind of drowsy. We've all been there where you're like, oh, I'm totally awake. What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
And so the coolest thing about that was about a month later, my friend Sal D'Amelio is driving, and he's like, Jeff, I was listening to your podcast. Happened to be the Anson Williams episode. I'm coming back from a gig. It's a long drive. I'm exhausted. I hear it. I pull over. I buy some lemons, and then and then I keep going. And so I was like, wow, maybe. I mean, you can't prove the negative, but but in a way, it's like it was exactly like he said when people hear it, and it was like things like that. Like Burt Ward has a dog food that he created that is Gentle Giants, which I switched to my dog too. He's saved over 15,000 dogs. Probably over 20,000 at this point. And this food he developed is sort of counter to the food dog foods that we get in the store. And his dogs live twice as long and people on this dog food. So it's just like some of these folks have dedicated their lives and do things that are so much cooler than the pop culture nostalgia thing that we love. Lydia Cornell, loved that episode. That's a great one. From Too Close
the one
for Comfort.
with Jim J. Bullock and
Yes, she's great. Ronnie Cox, I think that was my episode 100. He was great. You'd know him from Deliverance and Total Recall and RoboCop.
Well, in Star Trek: The Next Generation, he was the evil admiral.
Yes. Well, I think he thought he was setting them straight, but yes.
Listen, I love that list. I love that and those things about Anson Williams. That's great. I think that's great info because I've often wondered, how does Ralph Mouth make a living? And the convention things did not really come along until the last 35, 40 years. So how did Kathy Garber make a living? Garber make a living, when you weren't getting the roles anymore and the money they made has run out. And that's fascinating. Burt Ward. What a great story.
Well, the interesting thing that I learned, because I thought the same thing as you, is they did have those shows back then. And they were more like car shows. They would go to car shows. Like Burt Ward during Batman made more money on a weekend than he did ever making money as Robin on Batman. And so they evolved into the Comic-Cons that we know today. But originally they would do those things, those press things where they would pay him to go somewhere and then sign autographs was a huge, huge money. That's how they made all their money.
You talk about the industrial shows. I saw one yesterday. I'm a science fiction geek, right? I love Doctor Who, the British sci-fi show. Do you know it?
I'm familiar with it.
Okay. Well, one of the doctors, and the brilliance behind the show is he's an alien. So when the original actor got sick, and the show came on in 1963, when the original actor got sick, they came up with this wonderful premise that his race, when they die, regenerate. And the body completely changes and turns into a new body with a new personality, but the same memories. Right?
Right.
So the show has been on since 1963. And they've had a cavalry of people play the Doctor. One of them, the third Doctor, is a guy named John Pertwee. And John Pertwee was this elegant, regal guy. He was an action star. He was in the Marine, the Navy, and the Royal Navy on World War II. And he was just he was the action doctor. He was a doctor who did it like James Bond. He was just there. And I saw yesterday this industrial thing where they're talking about this new product, and this couple is going, but doctor, where do you find this? And he's like, blah, 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 and he's giving all the speech. Blah, 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 blah. And doctor, and it's 15 minutes long. Blah, 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 blah. And this is like in the early 70s, mid 70s. And doctor, blah, 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 blah. And at the end, she goes, but how does it work? I kid you not. He goes, well, show us your tits and I'll tell you about it. And you're not expecting it. It would be like if Captain Kirk was giving this speech and all of a sudden he goes, well, show us your tits and I'll tell you. But they did it for the guys you had to realize it was an all male sales force, right? You know it was.
I hope that, otherwise there'd be a lawsuit there. But
yeah, and back in the 70s, and they did, right? And I watched it and I'm like, I can't believe I just saw what I saw. But I'm sure he was paid a ton of money, like you're saying. And it was just so fascinating. And to hear all of the inside behind the scenes stories, because life goes on for these people, you know? And did Burt Ward, did he get a kick? Cause I'm going to list the episodes because there's only 250. So I only have so much damn time, Jeff. Right? There's other podcasts I listen to also beside yours, damn it. Did he revel in Adam West's success later, than when Adam West became this icon? Or was there any kind of, damn it, why not me? Why aren't I getting those things too?
Burt Ward has a very strong love and memory of Adam West. So I don't think you would ever see him saying anything, if you read his biography that Burt Ward wrote, there's some shticks that Adam West did to him, at certain points during his career. But when I talked to him, and Burt Ward is episode 250, by the way, that'll be his return visit to my show. And so it was interesting. He was episode 50. And then they called me and he's like, oh, Burt Ward wants to be on your show again. I'm like, all right, good timing. It just feels right, doesn't it, Gary? Episode 50 and then coming back for episode 250. It's kind of cool. It has a ring to it, right? And
and the fact that they remembered you and want to be a part of it, that's a testament of what you do. And you do your job. Again, as you can tell, I'm a fan. I'm a fan. And I freely admit that I'm a fan. Right. And the fact that I think and that's why I asked you, because I knew you would tell me, and I knew you would tell me in the nicest possible thing, because the great thing is you're a nice guy. And I don't think that's a pejorative. I think that's why people enjoy talking to you, because they know you've done the research, but they can also intrinsically tell that you're enjoying their company.
I do. Absolutely. Who else? I have a power. I don't know. Did you ever watch the Shazam show when you're growing up on Saturday morning?
Yeah, of course we did.
Just before Burt Ward, the episode coming out on Monday is Michael Gray. He was Billy Batson on Shazam. So it's like I started going down this path where I realized, and I still have a few to go. It's like I had Burt Ward. I think it started with Burt Ward actually. And then I had John Wesley Shipp. He was the Flash.
Yeah, right? I listened. I enjoyed that.
He was good. And then I had Nicholas Hammond, who was 1970s Spider-Man. So I started really. Oh, and then I got Billy Batson and then Hilaire, and then he was Michael Gray was Billy Batson. So I started collecting these characters that were sort of the original superheroes that we grew up with. I just thought it was so great. I was just like, because it's interesting. Like when you do themes, like with Happy Days, I have Mrs. Cunningham, Ralph Malph, and Potsy. We keep talking about Ralph Malph and Potsy, but we're burying the lead. I had Marion Cunningham.
Marion Cunningham, and her son is like an amazing impressionist.
Yeah, I talked to him also. He was incredible. He was super fun. I said to him, Jim, your mom invited me to come to your house. he's like, Jeff, she invites everyone. I go, I know, but I was invited. I was invited. And, I may just show up. So.
Oh man, see, I got it. You need to hook a fella up. I need to talk to these guys. I just, cause I'm such a fan too, and just grew up. And I do the same thing when somebody sends me a book I read the whole damn thing. And I am shocked by how, to a person, they're like, you read it?
Most people don't.
And I'm like, yeah, and that's what I said. I said, people don't read it. And like, no. And I did this one author, and she sent me this book, and she goes, I've done 20 of these, and you're the only one that's ever read it.
Well,
and I'm like, wow.
But I tell you, Gary, the reason I'm willing to put the time in, and I watch the movies. I had an interview with Galen Hurd. She was the executive producer of Terminator 2, Aliens. I mean, like every amazing
yeah, that's a nice
movie.
little resume, huh?
Yeah, and every amazing thing ever. And it's I'll put the time in to watch the movies. You know what I mean? It doesn't hurt me to rewatch Terminator 2. I should be doing that anyway, and everyone should as well. But this is why, though, if someone calls me and says, you can have 10 minutes with them, I'm like, my show's an hour. I need an hour. Because if I'm going to put that much, I'm not going to read a book, and I'm not the fastest reader. I'm not going to watch a TV show. I'm not going to spend hours if you're going to give me 10 minutes. You know what I mean? So that's why, specifically, my show isn't generally publicity for something that just came out, unless they'll spend time with me. Spencer Garrett spent time with me, and he was just out and he was doing promotions for Winning Time, which is a great miniseries, by the way. But we talked about his entire career. So it's like, I need both, you know what I mean? And so that's why I'll put the time in. If someone says they want to talk to you for 10 minutes, I'm like, well, I'm not reading the book. You know what I mean? If I'm going to put time in, I need time back. You know what I mean? So that kind of thing.
I've done quick ones, but it's like, cause I can do singers, right? And singers, there's only so much, you can do. And especially if they're very busy and if they're at the top of their game, like I had Elle King and I've had Elle on before, my radio show. And they were like, listen, she's literally only got 15 minutes. That's all she's got. This is just us, calling from a tour bus. And I'm like, okay, I'll take that. So I can do the shorter ones, and I have done the shorter ones. And I don't mind because it's just a quick little thing, and you can go, hey, we have Elle King on, which sounds good, and she's a big star, and it's awesome. But I'm the same way with you. I always tell everybody, I want at least 30, and I'll go as long as you can go. And we'll try to go for an hour because most people are kind of done talking after an hour. People have hit their kind of limit. And most people, Joe Rogan, bless his heart, I admire 3-hour podcasts. I would never listen to one in my entire life because I don't have that kind of time. I'd never record a 3-hour podcast. I damn sure wouldn't listen to one. But
well, if he doesn't, if he doesn't edit, I could see where I always think about editing. But I agree with you.
He's got a team.
Right. A lot of times the reason I shoot for 60 is usually that ends up somewhere around a good 45, 50 at the end. The dog, somebody has to get up or somebody comes to the door. So there's 2 minutes here that you got to cut out anyway, or something like that. And so usually if they're willing to sit with you for an hour, then you can comfortably get it. I personally don't like going more than an hour. I've only done it one time on purpose because it's just hard to edit it. I mean, it just takes a long time to edit an hour show over and over again. Here's another one that I love is Thunder Levin on my show. So now, caveat. If you're obsessed with the Sharknado movies like me, that's a top one right there. He wrote Sharknado 1, 2, 3, and 4. That puts him at the top of my list of greatest people ever. And so I was obsessed with the Sharknado movies. And so to talk to him. I rewatched all 4. We dove into each one. But the only other time where I was just like, oh my God, I how much can I keep this going? Because I really didn't want to stop talking to him was Dave Thomas. That's if you look at the time on that one, it's over an hour. But it was like, I really, really enjoyed talking to Dave Thomas a lot.
I can't wait because I was such a big fan, and I've got it, I've got mine queued up because I've just been listening it, and I've got Dave Thomas queued up, and I want to hear it because I was such a fan of SCTV. I thought it was one of the most brilliant few years of television there ever was, and that's where we got Martin Short and there were Catherine O'Hara and Eugene Levy. Yeah, I mean, these John Candy. This is where all of these were. And if you can go find SCTV, just watch them. And they were Joe Flaherty, who did he did the vampire kitty shows. Hey, that's scary, kids. And it was just this
SCTV is the best.
And they did it. It was just film. There was no live audience. So it was just film shorts.
Right. Harold Ramis was year 1 head writer. So it was it's just an amazing collection of folks. And probably Gilda Radner and Dan Aykroyd would have been part of it, but they got pulled to Saturday Night Live.
I would love to get Joe Flaherty on, because it's one thing to get Catherine O'Hara or another thing to get Eugene Levy or Martin Short. They're big stars, and they're going to be kind of worried about their reputation and how that goes off, even though it'd be a brilliant conversation. And I would love it. If anybody wants to get Martin Short on, please have him come on. But Joe Flaherty was such a big thing, and he's not that biggest name. He's not the one that emerged. And I think that's where you can truly mine deep and find gold with a guy like Joe Flaherty. So now I got to go find it before you do.
Yeah. I think the race is on. One of my recent ones with Gina Yashere was interesting because she's one of the co-creators of Bob Hart, Bobby Shola, which is one of those Chuck Lorre show on CBS. But I wasn't as familiar with her, but there are people who reached out to me because she happened to be coming to Detroit. But she's huge in the UK, like huge. And so like on Twitter, when I posted it, the UK people were like, oh my God. The US people were like, oh, we don't really know. But it's a great conversation. It's very fascinating. I mean, talk about someone who's got stories, it's like, it's really a lot of fun. So.
Well, and that's what I love about the Classic Conversations podcast too, is that your episodes are timeless. There's some, like I have some podcasts that if I don't listen to them the week they come out, they just go in the list. I never listen to them. Anything current listed, like anything news oriented or stuff like that, are just current events, not even news, just current events. If you don't catch it the week it's out, you're not going to go back and listen to it.
Right.
Except your podcast. There's a few of them that I will go and listen to and just go down. And when I'm just doing mindless stuff, one of the things I do for a brain break is I'll go to the golf course. I don't have time to play golf and I suck, but I like to practice. And I'll put on my earbuds and I'll listen to Classic Conversations because it's timeless. And I sit back and hear these conversations, and I'm putting and chipping. That's all I do. And I'll sit back and listen. I'll find myself laughing or going, oh, well, I didn't know that. Rita Rudner, she left home at 15. Her dad bought her a bus ticket, and she left home at 15. What? John Wesley Shipp, the way he got written out of Dawson's Creek. It's like, hey, well, the kids are going to college. You have to die. Wait, what?
Yeah. Well, that was it. It's very rare that if you're listening to one of my shows, to your point, that it'll reference anything specific. Now, the Gina Yashere episode is different because she had called me and they were coming to Detroit. So she happens to mention that she'll be in Detroit next month. But it really, that's 10 seconds, And so like the John Wesley Shipp one, for example, Hopefully he's not listening. But like, there was a whole end where he was talking about a Comic-Con he was going to. And I'm like, no. Yeah, because I knew it wouldn't air before it. And I don't want, why talk about something. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of airtime for something that, it doesn't matter anymore. You know what I mean? And so unless if someone were to go, it was Ringo's birthday yesterday. I'll cut that out because
you're so much more diligent because I reference the fact that when they say it's Ringo's birthday, I said, as we take this, it is, right? Because.
But Gary, I mean, in my defense.
You don't have to defend yourself. You're brilliant. Saying, I'm a fan.
It's really interesting because I don't release in the order or any specific order that I record. Okay. So for example, right now, as many episodes as I have out, I could stop recording right now and probably go a year and be able to put stuff out without missing a beat. Like that's how many interviews I have recorded, because when someone like Bernie Kopell goes, I can talk to you tomorrow, you don't say no to Bernie Kopell. You know, you don't put off an 80-year-old actor. Can we talk in 2 months? You know, you don't do that. You know, Ed Asner died 3 months after I talked to him. You know, so like when people talk to me or are willing to talk, I talk. And so what that means is I have like this whole backlog. And so that's why I joke if someone says it was Ringo's birthday yesterday, it could have been 8 months ago.
I totally
and then
it
severely dates it, right? And so now if I were to release it right away, and I know I'm going to release it right away for some reason, you know, and then I'll allow different, because then the release date is synced up. I know I think about things that nobody cares about, but in my head, the continuity thing of those things is important to me. So,
well, again, may I remind you that I am a fan. And I love the way you do things.
I appreciate that.
I love the way you do things. And I understand. And yeah, you record when people are available, right? It's the same thing as I send you my calendar. And whatever time you pick, I'm there. Because you're doing me the honor of coming on. And the same thing when somebody goes, I've done that before. Hey, he's available tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Okay. You know, yeah, I'm in. All right. Or if they say, well, he's only available at 9:30 on a Wednesday night. Sure. And you stack these interviews. I don't have enough for a year, but I probably have enough to get me through Thanksgiving if I stop today.
Enough so you don't have to worry about it. Somebody doesn't show up, anything like that. You don't have to worry about it.
And the hard part is, when you find this, people will go, so when's it coming on? And I'm like, I don't know, because I do. I don't. Unlike you, who knows how to do everything, I have a team of people who help me do it. Right, so I send it off to people, and the guy cuts it up. Hey, thank you, man. And you know, and then they schedule it and they get it all on. And I'm like, I don't know when you come on. I wish I
get
knew,
that. I get that.
But you have to move things up too, right? So you want to try to get your big names, you know, because you're constantly wanting to be able to go, hey, we got so-and-so. And if you're not a big name, if you've written a book and it's fun and it's a great book, but it's not going to really draw a lot of people, hey, you'll be on the back burner.
The way I like to do that is I'll have a big name, and then I can put some maybe smaller draws. And then I'll drop another big name, you know, so then they're kind of in the mix, you know what I mean? Which is, I think, one of the benefits to like me being ahead, you being ahead, is you could be like, well, you know what? I did a couple of singers. Let's put Jeff on because he's a comedian or he's a podcaster, and it'll break up the flow. You know what I'm saying? You don't have the same thing over and over again. Like, I don't want to run 5 comedians in a row, you know, because if someone's not into comedians, those conversations, then I don't want them to tune out. But if they can deal with it every now and then, or, you know what I'm saying? Like, so you have the ability to kind of control how, you know, the content of your show based on who you're talking to, if you're a little bit ahead. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, exactly right. And like, I look forward because, you know, you won't be one of the things, because again, I'm going to sell it on my social pushes and stuff, that you're going to love this show because I love his podcast. So I know you're going to love this podcast. Right. And when you find out what it's about, you're going to be, oh, wow. That's so cool. And I just find it when I sit back, I just like I love the art of comedy. I always love talking to comedians. I don't do comedy. I've done, doing morning radio for all these years. I've done my comedy, but I always tell them it's an improv act every morning because I don't know. I'm sure making it up, right? And so it's an improv act every morning that I do it. But I love people who craft things and the art of it. When you watch a Bill Burr, when you watch a Richard Pryor, when you watch a Bob Newhart, who just crafts things, man, I love that.
They're good. They're good. You can tell, the people that are timeless and amazing and really put the time in. It definitely shows. So, I'm like,
So is that a dream guest, Bob Newhart?
He would be great. I think my dream guest is Henry Winkler. And I've been turned down 4 times. So it's not like I haven't asked.
Yeah. Potsy couldn't pull any strings for you?
I pulled that string and it was like, he doesn't like talking about happy days. And I was like, well, he would be one where I would take 15 minutes, but it's one of those things. So, all you can do is ask. Sometimes it's not in the cards. So I try to get like a combination of, there's people that are on all the podcasts that kind of circle around, and I try and get a good amount of people that are unique perhaps to my podcast, just to kind of make it look a little different, sound a little different. But I find that, the other kind of thing that's kind of neat is like when people go, oh, I listened to your interview with Fred Grandy and I learned things, and I've listened to a lot of interviews with Fred Grandy. And so, a gopher from the Love Boat. But those are the things that make me real happy. Okay, the funniest thing with Fred Grandy, if you want a quick story, is he was, I don't remember if he was, whatever government he was in. He was in the Senate.
Yeah, he was a senator.
Senator.
Yeah, he was a congressman. He was a congressman. That's it.
So I read him like, okay, I said, Fred, here's 3 things that you did. And I read him some bills that he had done. And he goes, yep. And I'm like, Fred, I completely made up that last one. It was something about making it illegal to manually dismantle a Rubik's Cube and put it back together and say you put it back together correctly and not admit that you had put it back together, from in pieces. And he's like, oh, well, it sounded real. Who knows?
So why do you and Adam Carolla have such a fascination with the Love Boat? Because if you ever listen to Adam's podcast, same thing. He loves that's what he spends his free time doing, is watching Love Boat.
I think I grew up watching it, and a lot on Saturdays, just a kid at home, not a lot of social life. And I remember watching that, and maybe Fantasy Island, maybe that was on too late. I can't remember, but I have strong memories of Mr. Rourke and Tattoo. But I don't know. It was just something about the Love Boat. It always ended happy. It was, and everyone was on it. When you talk to them, it was interesting, the Love Boat, because they would bring in all the stars of the day. Like Tom Hanks was on it. Like all the current stars were on it because it was a showcase and a vehicle for them to bring on their stars from their other shows. So it was always like, they always had the cutting edge people, but then they also gave new life to the classic stars that didn't really work anymore. So that's why you see all the old timers on the Love Boat. And the reality about the old timers, while, Hollywood or just society moves past old people, they were the best. Those are the people that had the best timing. They were the funniest, there's a reason, like back in the day, so it had like that combination of all of that. There was nothing really not to like about the Love Boat.
Well, it's because it never caught my fancy. I watched it. I remember when it came on. I remember when it debuted, right? And so, I remember it being the zeitgeist of the culture. The Love Boat was the show. And I watched it, but I find it funny that men of a certain age, and it's usually mostly men, are fascinated by that show. and they'll watch it over and over again, the way I would watch Star Trek, right? Or Doctor Who, and they'll watch it over and over again. And I'm like, wow, it just never captured me like that. But you're exactly right. It's where you got to see the Jack Joneses of the world, and he's the guy who actually sang the Love Boat.
Right.
And see all these
Paul Williams
stars
wrote it.
from see all the stars from 60s and 70s, right? That Paul Williams is another. Look him up, kids. Remember, he used to be on all the talk shows 70s and 80s. He could write a great song, could not sing a note. Him and Anthony Newley. How about that for a duet partner? Anthony Newley and Paul Williams. You remember Anthony Newley?
No, you're too old for
Oh
me.
my God. Anthony Newley was a big thing in 60s and 70s. And I'm not kidding. You can look him up. It's just like, what kind of feeling? I mean, that's the way the impressionists would do it. Because he would be like, and Paul Williams, what kind of, because he wrote the Muppets.
Right.
Yeah.
He wrote Rainbow Connection and all those. Yeah.
Rainbow
He's written a lot.
Connection.
He's written
Listen
a million
to him
things.
singing it. Yeah, listen to him sing it. He can't sing. He cannot sing. And I know that because, we do songwriters nights in country music, and we have some songwriters who are amazing singers. And there's some who aren't. Matter of fact, some of the best songwriters in the world couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. And it's amazing. And they're artists, and they play every instrument, and they can do anything and everything except sing. It's crazy. It's crazy. And I always find songwriters tend to be more interesting than the singers themselves, if you want to be honest. Right? Because they have a different skill set.
Yeah. I don't talk to many musicians. I've talked to, oh my God, I'm blanking on his name from Grand Funk Railroad, Mark Farner. But that was a great conversation. But Grand Funk Railroad had a rich history that I could dive into to talk to him about.
We're an American band, baby.
Yeah, it's only because I enjoy music, but I don't understand it at the level that I fandom over TV or film, right? So I don't know what to ask, But that being said, John Billings, who's a bass player for the Monkees currently, was another one of my favorite conversations, just because we had a great time talking, and he had, but it's you never know, I guess, is where you're going to find the conversation. I was talking to this person, Dava Savell. She's, she wrote the puppy episode for Ellen, which is the coming out episode that she won an Emmy for, which is where Ellen came out as gay. And, it's considered one of the most groundbreaking, most important episodes ever. You know what I mean? I was just like, so cool. And I was like, and she told me on my podcast a story that I saw was going around now, which is when, what was the guy? Tom Arnold was attacking Julie Louis-Dreyfus in her car and stuff like that, because Julie Louis-Dreyfus parked in Tom Arnold's spot by accident once. And then Tom Arnold just went bully all over her. I mean, it was just they started a war, with the Jackie Thompson show or whatever the show he was doing at that time. Or maybe he was with Roseanne still, and the Seinfeld crew. It was just, there's weird stories you can just find everywhere. It's crazy. Okay.
I would not mess with Julie Louis-Dreyfus. I mean,
no, I would never mess with her.
She got, worldwide money. She got money because she's from the Dreyfus Fund, right? So she got money that could make you and your state
Gary Kroger is another great one. If you want to put in the top 5 of my episodes, Gary Kroger, who was on Saturday Night Live with Julie Louis-Dreyfus and Brad Hall. They all came together. That was in the in-between years when Lorne Michaels wasn't there. I remember
Gary Kroger.
Gary Kroger, I'm like, I was telling him, I was like, you're like Saturday Night Live to me. That was me, because he's looking at it in the context of full Saturday Night Live. And I'm like, look, when I started watching Saturday Night Live, you were Saturday Night Live. So yes, you are Saturday Night Live to me. You, Julie Louis-Dreyfus, Brad, that group is when I really started watching it. So it wasn't the Belushi, that's when you start watching, it's sort of who you append to and who you think of and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, Gary Kroger. This is really a big deal for me. and so I was like, yeah, so we did a whole history of Saturday Night Live during that time frame. It was really cool. I like finding stuff that I like that people do that they don't necessarily usually talk about. Gary Kroger starred in a TV movie, the first live action adaptation of Archie. He was Reggie. And so like I brought that up and we dove into that and he's like, wow, nobody talks about this. I'm like, not only are we talking about it, I just rewatched it. I'm all in. So
see, that's something I love about having a conversation with you, because that makes me go back going, why, when they did Spider-Man No Way Home, did they not bring Nicholas Hammond back to have a cameo in it? Why?
Yeah. You know what the interesting thing about how I got Nicholas, how I thought to get Nicholas Hammond, they did an article with him, the Hollywood Reporter. Like, is he coming back? When they were all talking about, they didn't know at this point if Toby and Andrew were coming back, right? And so every other publication just republished that same article with Nicholas Hammond, right? So I'm like, I'm going to call Nicholas Hammond. I'm like, hey, would Nicholas Hammond like to be on my podcast? And they're like, yeah, he would. I'm like, great. Because he was not only Spider-Man, he was one of the Von Trapp kids, right? Mm-hmm. And so now I've had 2 Von Trapp kids on my podcast. See, I like to theme it
Angela
up.
Cartwright.
That's right. And so, yeah, so it's fun. So
Isn't it amazing how much worthless trivia we have stored in our minds?
So much. I didn't even realize. So just
the fact
start
that you
talking
could say
to
Grand
you.
Funk Railroad and I sit back and go, it's an American band. I mean, come on. The stuff that's just right there. But by the same token, I've sat there, had to fill out a form the other day, and I have an 11-year-old. I looked at him, I said, okay, don't be mad. He goes, what? I said, your birthday is blank, right? And he goes, yes. And I'm like, okay, so I was right.
I do that too. You become your grandma, where you my grandma, I'll go, I'm calling my daughter's by the dog's name. Like that name works into the list. Lola. Yeah. And it's like, you can't think of anything. It was like, someone's like, you don't remember my number? I'm like, I don't even know my kids' numbers. Why would I know your number?
But I can remember Angela Cartwright and Nicholas Hammond were Von Trapp kids. And yeah, I got that. I'm all in on that.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
I have to ask you, can we do this again?
Yeah, I'm free every week.
I'd love it. Don't tip me.
The Jeff and Gary show. We can just the
Jeff and Gary show where Gary just interviews Jeff, and that's all we ever need to do. You never need to interview me. I just need to interview you. That's all we need to do. Jeff, this has been amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's always nice to talk with one of my fans.
I can't wait to go rewatch all your episodes.
I can't wait for you to rewatch. Just put it on play. Everyone go listen. Classic Conversations on Apple or wherever. Boom. Right after you listen to Gary's podcast, go check out mine.